Mine are tight. I'm hoping the newcomers get them.
Oh, yeah. I actually wore my car out instead of that one,
Yes.
because I knew if I wore that one, I
Yeah.
was.
But I think they were like, no, it's hot, but today it was cold.
It almost looks like it's-
And then once we got like moving and just kept going, I was like, okay, I'm okay.
Yeah.
I kept feeling like coming off and back on.
People in my office and
What,
when I don't go yet, I'm not asleep. When I was young, stuff didn't matter, but now. It matters. I know, but I sound like my son, because my son is younger and he's kind of that way too. He needs a little bit of that, he'll do it and he'll do fine, but he. So do we have any We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Say it again. We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order at 6:03. Let us say the pledge. I'm so sorry. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okie dokie, so we got the pledge, we got enough counselors, we have Counselor Wildhopper. Can't speak. Hildebrandt. Mackin, myself. And Robin Peterson, thank you, so sorry, and Peterson, so we're good to go. On that, so we're just gonna dive into letting Dawn talk. We don't have anybody to talk anyways that signed up, right?
No, we don't.
Oh, good.
Well, everybody's been interested, it's right now.
Right?
Yeah.
Or how about actually reading what's going on instead of blabbing all over this?
Yeah. So just to catch you guys up, 3 days ago, one of our wells up at the Springs watershed. We discussed it at the last council meeting, how we were getting air in the lines from that well. It actually went to the point where we had to shut it off because it was just pushing straight air. We were just getting little spurts of water coming out of it. We shut it down for 3 days. We turned it for two and a half days. Turned it back on. It's running roughly 40-50 gallons a minute. It's not.
And it's usually running 150?
No, it's usually,
I've always heard 50.
yeah,
Oh, so we're 80%.
yeah.
Right.
But as soon as we turned it back on, the water, after letting it sit for 2.5 days, it filled up. As soon as we turn it back on, it's sucked back down again. We're having the same issues out at the well field that we've been dealing with all summer, or since late summer. They're still not recovering. We're still 20, between 15 and 20 feet in each of those wells. So we're really struggling to stay up with demand.
Has demand just increased? What? Or what, can you explain that?
Our gallons per minute are up a little bit, but not anything extreme. We're usually somewhere around 325 to 350. Right now, we're around 400, 415. So we're not too much higher for the year on average, but we're struggling to get water out of the ground.
Do we think it's because there's so many different people pulling on the aquifer?
I honestly don't know.
Out in the well field, I don't think there's a lot of other people that are in the aquifer that
That you're
the
pulling from.
city is pulling from. Because the city was not able to pull from the more productive layers because of those are reserved for farm use. So I don't think that there's a lot out there. It's just,
We're talking the ones on Airport Road.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
the road. I mean, those have just declined. They've been steadily
Over the
declining in
years,
yield
yeah.
over the years, and now they're down substantially below what they've ever been before. And as a consequence to that, they've been having to pump the wells over in the watershed, the McDougal wells, pretty much constantly to try to keep up.
So,
And so we're pulling water, the water table is declining over there as well. Now, whether there's some other wells over that are pulling out of the basalt aquifers over there, I don't know. I mean, you could look at well logs, but there's no way to tell what, how much
They
anybody
don't.
is pumping at any time of year.
Sure, yeah.
I was just, well, I'm here today on my scooter as opposed to having to drive in the car. I can't remember the last time I had to come down to a meeting because it was raining. Or use my car because it was raining. Is that part of what we have here? We're not enough rain, we're not, there's not enough water in the ground.
So we've
Is this
discussed
part of
it
what's going
with a couple of vendors that we have. One specifically is a well company that did the rehabs on the wells over the summer. And he has informed us that there's quite a few people in the area, not maybe the immediate area, but he's dealing with similar issues. And from what the research he's digging into, has informed public works staff that we are dealing with a 5-year drought roughly. Just because of the excessive heat we've dealt with in the summer times. So he said, we're not in this alone. There's a lot of
Yeah.
places that our productions are down on wells. So
Kind of means there's no easy fix.
I mean,
There are fixes.
I mean, one of the things with groundwater wells, it's a given that any groundwater well, your highest production that you're gonna get out of that well is usually right when it's drilled. And the production out of any well, whether it's in rock or in gravel aquifers, is going to decline over time. It's just how much it declines is the huge variable.
Which that has a lot to do with all the other users around, how many other wells, because even though there's different aquifers, they affect one another.
Yeah.
So,
But one of the big things with the well field wells is that it's very high in iron and manganese, and it has methane in the water, which
yes,
to a certain extent acts as a food source for the bacteria. You have that biofilm growth, not just on the well screen, but back into the gravel layers as water is flowing through that. And as you're pulling water through that, you have layers of clay above and below those gravel bands. Or as you're pulling water through that, it's no different than on a stream. It's gonna pull some particles of that clay that then get into there and then settle into the gravel bands, and it starts to blind it off. And so the challenge is it gets less and less efficient on, even if there is water there, it gets less and less efficient on moving the water horizontally through the ground to the well's borehole.
as they fill in on their own.
And while we can clean the actual borehole and the screen itself, there is no technological way that you can clean back out into the aquifer. And I mean, this well declines and water level, declines is not unique to the Willamette Valley. I mean, that's all over.
And it's not anticipated to get any better because of the future expectation of it warming.
So what are the options? You said there are fixes, what, how long?
Well, there are fixes, I mean, there's immediate fixes, but there's other fixes, and that's more of a bigger problem. as well.
Short-term.
Yeah.
We talk it. Is there anything we could do? Cause this is winter. It seems like there's not a whole lot of outdoor watering going on anyway. I don't know how many people wash their cars, but
A lot of people wash their cars.
so we might be
Yeah.
able to monitor about that.
There-
But, if this is happening in the winter, what's gonna happen in a few months?
It's.
We better hope we
It won't
get
get-
good
It won't
snow.
get better in the summer.
It won't
that's
be
for sure.
pretty.
We have a ticking time.
What can we do?
So
How do we fix this?
we dive into the next discussion, the next part. Did you want to speak to anything, Jeremy, first? Or?
Go right ahead, Denny.
Okay. I mean, there is no quick or easy fixes available for the challenge of the wells. I mean, we can't.
Sorry, before you get into it real quick. So current state, we're normally pulling 350, 375 gallons per minute, right? Somewhere in the ballpark.
Yeah.
And we're at 400 to 415. Obviously our wells are down. Are pressures enough to meet fire needs?
Well, we are maintaining fire flow.
Well,
Okay.
it's not pressure, it's the volume of water you have stored in the reservoir. So
Oh.
fire flow storage volume
Okay,
is what we're trying to maintain.
gotcha,
Because the pressure is produced by the booster pumps in the treatment plant.
sure,
The
sure,
challenge is that, we had this long discussion with Public Works of how much fire flow do we actually need? Well, if somebody could tell me if we're gonna have a fire and what kind of fire we.
sure, yeah,
we're gonna
yeah,
have,
yeah.
then you would be able to answer that definitively.
A 1,000 square foot house versus an entire block, right,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah,
who's to know,
or a, multi-story building or something.
right?
The fire flow storage is based on some assumptions. It's not absolute worst case scenario, but it is not best case scenario either.
Sure,
So if we drop below that fire flow storage amount, we had this discussion that we're not gonna immediately start to damage pumps through the system or anything like that. It's just if something happens, you may not have enough water to deal with it. And then continue to. But the challenge right now is at the levels we have, we don't have enough production to meet domestic demand in the city
sure,
and,
keep fire flows,
well, no, fill the reservoirs back up.
right, right.
So,
Do we, has it been, are we as certain as we can get, there's not a leak somewhere?
oh, I am as certain can be that there are leaks somewhere in the system.
Okay.
I-
Got
I-
it.
A lot.
But we.
Leaks beyond, I should say, historical knowledge. Or,
Well, the challenge, in one respect, in circling back to Kitty's comment. The water supply and use situation doesn't get better in the summer, but finding leaks actually. Is easier in the summertime, because if you got, if you got water a wet spot along the road somewhere.
Yeah.
You can,
pretty evident,
you can test it with your chlorine kit, and if there's chlorine in it, there's a leak there. This time of year, going around looking for wet spots along the road. Doesn't do anybody any good,
right,
so,
okay. I was just curious, because if that, obviously we can't change the environmental thing today, right?
Yeah.
No one has the power to do that, so. What we can change is like if there are leaks in the system, and if there's major leaks that are beyond what is historical.
Well, and so every month Ricky in the front office, she does the billing and all that, and she gets, cause our meters notify, when we read meters, they'll give us high consumption alerts. So anybody that's got high consumption alerts, she notifies to let them know, hey, you potentially have a leak. We haven't seen anything extremely out of the ordinary. We've had a couple high consumptions, we've had a couple that were leaks that have popped up, and the next month they're back down to normal usage. So we do kind of have some documentation along that to, there's nothing really just jumping out, like
Sure,
there's a massive leak here.
we got a main with a
Yeah.
pinhole or
Yeah.
whatever, right, okay,
So,
and Public Works has found a couple of leaks on. Service lines and on the city side of things, and those have been repaired. I don't know the details, Don can speak to it, but they had leak detection people out. Going around trying to, and what they do is they hook up the things and acoustically try to listen for leaks. And then they know that, it's hard to, you have to go, jump around and then say, okay, the leak's that direction or getting louder. It's,
yeah,
in some respects, it's, warmer, colder type of
sure.
thing. But
that's usually an annual thing, just like our smoke testing. We usually bring a vendor out, have them do the whole system. So,
so.
That's good.
I haven't found any that jumped out, other than a service line over on the other side of the river that they were able to get stopped, closed down.
Yeah.
So.
Yep, I'm good.
So two quick questions before we kind of dive into the next steps. So one thing that I saw a lot of commentary around from the community is this immediate concern that this is with regard to new construction, things like that. And based off of what you said a minute ago, I just really want to definitively, get an answer, because from my takeaways, that has nothing to do with anything that we're going on, but I know that we're going to get asked that question and folks will be watching this. And so I just want to make sure that new construction, past, present, and upcoming is not a factor in a large way towards what we're going through. at the moment.
When you say new construction, what kind of construction, like?
Like the
home
new
construction?
residential,
Oh.
areas kind of, next to the baseball field and that kind of stuff, and what could be projected out, across the way.
I don't really have any dealings with
I don't
building
think,
permits per se, but I have, as far as I'm aware, it's not like there's a whole ton of new residential.
there
buildings
is,
going on.
everybody's talking about the 140 house thing, and that's not even planned yet.
Well, and that's still,
140.
I mean, that's a ways away. I
Yeah.
mean, even if they submitted an application tomorrow, it's gonna take them a significant amount of time to get through the land use process and get their design and before they're ready for construction.
And can you speak to a little bit of the same discussion? Yeah, Neil River's right there. Why can't we just pull water from that?
It's interesting that you asked that question, because that.
I like it.
The short answer is water rights.
And I knew that. They don't know how
Water-
convoluted
Yeah,
it is.
water is a publicly owned resource. And you get a right to use that water. It's the right to access water, a certain amount of water from a certain location at a certain flow rate for a defined purpose. And then the other key factor on that is it is based on the seniority of the water right. So it's first in line, first in time is first in line. And all, whether it's groundwater or surface water in Oregon is over appropriated. There's more water rights that have been issued than there is water available. I mean, just as an example, the city has water rights for 1,500 gallons a minute out of the well-filled wells. Well, those water rights were originally issued based on preliminary tests when they thought that they were gonna be able to, I mean, if the city was able to draw off of the upper aquifer that's reserved for the farm use because of the senior water rights, they might be able to get 1,500 gallons a minute. Some of the farm wells out there pump in the neighborhood of 800 gallons a minute or more. But even talking to the farmers out there, they also struggle with this, the fouling of their screens. They have to have their irrigation well screens cleaned on a regular basis. Whether that's once a year or more than that, I've never asked, or if they told me, I don't remember. But it's the same water, type of water. They struggle with the same issues. It's just the aquifer is far more productive that they're drawing.
Because they have more senior water rights.
Yeah,
Now,
they have more senior water rights.
people should know as well, when you purchase a home or a house or some property with water rights, you inherit that seniority of the water right.
And, if there's not enough water to go around, the more junior water rights start getting shut off to preserve the rights for the senior water rights to continue to utilize that water that they have the rights to.
And that's
So-
the major fights in Eastern Oregon.
So, in general, when this came up, I mean, obviously we have to get water from somewhere. And right now, since the wells are not producing, the only other, we're looking at any possibilities that we can think of. And so the first thing that we started off is to determine if there's options that are physically possible to implement. Now, whether these are politically or contractually or administratively possible to get through the process or not is another portion, it's the next step in the thing. So we pulled out all of the old record grinds for the treatment plant. And one of the questions that came up is there any way that we can essentially do a intertie with Backwater and Light and purchase water from them? The challenge is if we have to build a pipeline to do that interconnection, that takes a lot of time to get through that process. So we looked and tried to figure out, is there a way that we can do it with the infrastructure that what we found is at the water treatment plant, there appears to be a way that we can add some piping down there that would be able to pull water from the Lafayette transmission line, which currently would pump water from the Dayton water treatment plant down Ash Road over to the intersection of Highway 18 and Lafayette Highway, where it connects into the transmission line that goes over to Lafayette. Lafayette now has an interconnection as of a couple years ago where they're tied in. And several hundred feet down Highway 18 beyond Lafayette Highway, on the north side of the road, there's a small building there. That is their booster pump station. Backwater and Light extended a water line down to that location that connects to that building. Lafayette's system pressure on the valley floor is about 25 or 30 psi higher than Dayton's. So their pressure is actually higher in their system, is higher than Backwater and Light. So they had to put booster pumps in there to pump water out of Backwater and Light's distribution line there. They have a pipeline that goes down and then connects to their transmission line that goes up Lafayette Highway to Lafayette. There is a physical possibility of being able to take water from their Lafayette's booster pump station, backflow it the opposite direction as water usually goes through their transmission line over to the Dayton water treatment plant. Or if we can do some piping inside the plant to get water over and connect to the inlet to the Dayton reservoir, it would be physically possible to take that water and use it to fill the reservoir. Now there's still a lot of unknowns on this because none of us have been over and know how the Lafayette booster pump station is configured. We don't know what the capacity of their booster pumps are. We don't know what their contract with Backwater and Light says. And we don't know what Backwater and Light's view on this would be. Those are all to be explored.
I can tell you they charge Lafayette. She didn't tell me when I went to the mayor's coffee how much it was, but they get charged a lot.
1.5 times.
It's 1.5, what I've heard is it's 1.5 times the rate that they charge for residents in Lincolnville. That's the policy decision that the board of Backwater and Light has made for any of the small communities that they're gonna, have an intertie and provide water to.
That doesn't promote a regional facility at all.
Okay. So, I mean, at this point, what we've been tasked with Public Works is not how
No,
much is it gonna
I'm just
cost.
making-
Is there a physical way that we can do this in a relatively short duration without having to spend a huge amount of money to put in infrastructure that we're not sure whether or not we're gonna use need to use in the long term or not. And we think that we have come up with a way to do that. If these other, and I don't wanna call them hurdles, but they're obstacles, they're more,
Challenges.
hurdles that we have to figure out how to jump over.
Right.
We've talked about time a little bit, but kind of with respect to some of the projects, how much time do we have with what we have? Out of curiosity, have we projected that out of, with the data that we have at our disposal? I mean, are we looking at starting to see, critical system issues in a week, a month, 6 months, a year? And do we have an idea on what kind of timeline we need to function within?
I mean, with the data we have on the water production right now,
On our wells, yeah.
well,
Just out of curiosity.
quite honestly, we are at the critical level right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way around that.
We're in a plane, 2 engines down, we're just coasting.
Yeah.
Well, last year, that well field, we were 100+ feet in each one of those wells.
That's what I was following.
Today, we are 15, 14, 18.
Right, we got 2 engines down and a dead pilot.
Yeah,
We're,
we're at a credit stage.
yeah,
We might have it. There, and that's the reason that. Yeah. For the water restrictions being imposed is because. If we weren't at a critical stage. There would be no reason to impose water restrictions.
So, if we're having trouble getting water out of the ground and a lot of other people are too, does Minville have another source? Are they gonna be able to supply us on top of everything else?
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Just kind of just a step back and I am not an expert on their system, but this is in very general terms. And I'm gonna try to keep it at 40,000 feet and very general. McMinnville has two surface water reservoirs, 2 dams up in the Coast Range.
They have
Where
a lot of water.
that is their primary raw water source.
So they,
And they have.
Yeah.
A significant amount of water up there. They don't have water forever up there.
Huh.
Which is the reason, what was it, 10 years or so ago, 10 or 12 years ago, when there was water rights that were available for purchase or for acquisition on the Willamette River. It was Mackwater and Light, Dayton, Carlton,
The end.
is it Yamhill? Okay, there were several, Mackwater and Light, and several small communities in the valley got together and formed a regional water authority.
We dropped out.
And we went and they acquired the water rights on the Willamette River for a future surface water treatment plant that would draw water from the Willamette River. Have a regional water treatment plant, and then that would get distributed to the various members of that regional system. That has always been projected to be 20 or 30 years out in the future.
The problem, it was so cost prohibitive, it was so cost prohibitive that it was not even
Yeah.
worth our time.
So some of the,
Cost prohibitive for who?
The small cities,
well, it was, the projections were that the costs were gonna be high
astronomical.
right off the bat.
Sure.
At the time. The city had, that's about the same time that the Fisher Farms property became available.
And that's why we purchased.
And when we looked at the city didn't have, and the city is still paying, at the time, they still had 20 years left to pay on the bonds for the well fields and the water treatment plant. And that was 10 years ago now, so, we only have 10 years left on those. So we're in better shape than we were. And as it's turned out, based on an email that John Dietz shared with Dave. Mackwater and Light apparently has not begun charging any of their small cities. For any of the preliminary work that they've been doing on planning for this future Willamette River water treatment plant.
So they're gonna get their check. They're gonna get their pound of flesh.
Well, they will at some point, yeah, I mean, if a small city wants it in, they're gonna have to pay their proportionate share.
Yeah.
But
They
that-
wanted us to pay for their infrastructure too, initially.
Yeah, and what they've been talking about is that those payments would be starting up. Much sooner than the city felt like they could afford.
Sure.
Well, as it turns out, apparently that. Hasn't happened, they haven't started charging. Until we go and sit down with Backwater and Light, or until Jeremy sits down with Backwater and Light, we don't know what their current. Future plans are for charging, for embarking on this. Future water treatment plant. It's an unknown right now. They may have plans, but we don't know what they are. So. kind of to use an analogy, 10 years ago, the city felt like they were at a crossroad or at a fork in the road. And they had to make a decision, do we go right or do we go left?
And right was control our own destiny,
Yeah.
left
that
was a
the
regional water.
Regional system. And for various reasons, the city decided we need to take this fork in the road. Well, until recently, the assumption is have already started walking up this fork in the road, and we're significant ways up this fork in the road. Well, when we found out that backwater, because we thought that if we now went back and tried to opt into that regional system, we'd have to catch up with our payments. Water and Light has not charged anybody yet. We may still be standing right on that fork in the road. I mean, yes, definitely the city has turned and is facing this path. But if we've gone up that path, it's only a few steps. We're not miles up that path and have to backtrack and lose a ton. At least that's my perspective, just from an engineering standpoint.
So addressing the metaphorical elephant in the room, how does Fisher Farms fit into this? Because I don't know really much about Fisher Farms, I'll be honest. I don't know what infrastructure is there. I don't know the realistic nature of us being able to tie into that at any point in the near future. So
That's,
I'm just kind of curious.
Well,
How that's it.
Fisher Farms, the city acquired the property, they acquired the water rights, but one of those legs on the water rights is it's not just the right to use the water at a certain amount, but it's for a defined use. Those previous water rights were for agricultural use. The city hired a consultant, they went through all the work to change that use to municipal. I don't know that, I wasn't directly involved in that process. I don't know if that change to municipal use has been finalized yet. I do know that I saw one email. And I only got CC'd on a few of the emails, but one email, there was a discussion about whether or not the city could finalize that change it to municipal use before they had the infrastructure in place to actually use the water. And so this is a question the water rights consultants will need to answer. Where is the city in that process? As far as I know,
Sure.
that water there's no reason, nothing I know that says that water couldn't be used by the city. But it's not something that we can use in the short term, because it's just like the wellfield wells, it's got it's got methane in the water that we have to run through a methane stripper and strip out before we pump it to the treatment plant. Because once we pump it to the treatment plant or it goes into the reservoir, when it comes out of solution, it's in a confined space. And whether that's in the building or in the headspace in the reservoir, it's gonna build up, and methane is heavier than air, so it won't, float away. And when it eventually it will get to the level where it is ignitable. And that would not be a good scenario.
We'd have water right there, though.
body parts all over.
Yeah.
So, so outside of,
So it's not something that's available in the short term. Now. One of the objectives that we tried to look at the treatment plant is there a way to do a physical interconnection so we can get water from Water and Light, for instance, and not take have to take the existing treatment plant and wells completely out of service and throw them away, because that's still a resource, even though we're not getting as much water as we would like. That water may still be less expensive than purchasing it from Water and Light. The least expensive water that the city has comes from your watershed. I mean, the springs up there flows by gravity to the reservoirs up there, by gravity to town. You have some expense for, disinfecting it. You have the wells over there that pump into those reservoirs, but that's, relatively minor cost. There's no treatment required because of the quality of the water over there. So that system will stay in effect, producing as much water as it can. The well field wells, if this pans out, you know, the ideas we have out here, you would still be able to utilize the well field and potentially tie Fisher Farms into that to the extent that it can produce water into the future. And how much water that you'll be able to produce, most of the estimates that the hydrogeologists have given, even when we ask them to be, try to give us worst case scenarios, the worst cases turned out to be slightly worse than they thought the worst case scenarios would be. Fisher Farms, part of the challenge is that, there's discussions over the years have been, how do we get a long-term sustainable water supply for the city of Dayton? Well, the challenge is what is the definition in people's mind of long-term?
And sustainable.
Well, yeah, but in my mind, looking at it as an engineer, what is the definition of long-term? Because if long-term is 20 years, then one set of answers is gonna come out of that. I mean, Fisher Farms, depending on, how fast those wells decline, if they don't decline as fast as they did out of the well field. I mean, the well field wells right now are 20 years old. They were built in 2004. So Fisher Farms may be able to get you through the next 15 or 20 years, but if you're looking at the next 40 years or 80 years or 100 years, it's almost it is a certainty that groundwater is not the answer in the long term under that definition of long term. Because you can't get new water rights in the Willamette Valley now. And the existing wells that are out there, it's not just a matter of just punching another well in that same area, because you're drawing out of this. Then you got two straws, but you're drawing out of the same bathtub, and if the bathtub is getting empty, having two straws pulling out of it isn't gonna make the situation better.
One thing that's always been thrown around is Fisher Farms being a 50-year solution. Is that not necessarily looking to be the case?
Well, part of it depends on what assumptions you have. I mean, once again, I'm trying to keep this really general. If your assumptions were that the well field wells kept producing at the rate that they were producing 5 or 10 years ago, and that Fisher Farms wells would keep producing or would initially produce at the rate that the test pumping indicated, and that they kept producing at those same rates over the next 20 years, then you might have had enough water for longer than 20 years. So it depends on the assumptions that you have going in. And I mean, just as a kind of a side note, and I've shared this with Jeremy, I mean, West Tech represents a lot of small communities up and down the valley and along the coast. And one of the things that I've enjoyed over the past 18 years that I've worked in Dayton is that the people in Dayton tend to look at things from a pragmatic standpoint and are willing to listen to new ideas and to change course if the old ways don't seem to be working, or if the assumptions that you had for a certain path turn out to not be as accurate as you would have hoped. And I think that, we're kind of at one of these decision points in the road, not necessarily tonight, but here in the near future, of which direction do we want to go? And
Will that water master plan help us to determine that?
a new water master plan? The new water master plan document would it might help you with some of the some of the specifics and the details of how to implement a policy, but it won't change, it won't do anything to change the underlying reality that we are coming to grips with here in the past week and moving forward into the near future. So groundwater is gonna continue to become harder and harder to use because it's a limited resource and has a limited recharge. While there is uncertainty in climate, exactly what's gonna happen with the climate going into the future is also part of that uncertainty. We don't know. I mean, this year they have, near record snowpacks in the Cascade Range. Okay, how's that gonna affect? Yeah, I mean, is that gonna continue to happen winter after winter? Well, if you could answer that with accuracy, then you probably would be doing something where you didn't have to work as hard.
So,
There's a lot of assumptions here. The thing that is pretty certain is over the really long term, based on what information we have right now, groundwater is not the complete answer. I mean, it may be a partial solution. It's fairly certain that for instance, the Willamette River is not gonna quit running. Now, there is still some risk with those water rights because the water rights that the city has acquired are not extremely senior water rights. And so there's two issues. One is how much water is available in that water rights system. How much does the water rights say you can access? The second question is how much water is actually available during the critical time of the year, which is the middle or late summer.
One clarification, which water rights are not so senior that we're referring to at this point in time? So what you just referenced.
The Willamette River water rights.
Gotcha, okay.
I mean, there's far more senior rights up and down the Willamette than what the city acquired 15 years ago.
Oh, so we do have water, okay, okay.
Yeah. So, but,
Wait, fine.
between that and that water and lights, reservoirs, it's a far more certain water source than strictly groundwater.
so is that our only fiscal option at this time is the Lafayette transmission line, or are there other options?
In the short term,
No.
that appears to be the only short-term, relatively is in quotes, relatively inexpensive way to physically get water from point A to point B.
Next question.
Now, that will obviously not, well, I don't want to say obviously. In all likelihood, whatever interim thing we put in place right here will not be the final solution.
Right,
Because there's too many moving parts and variables in that. If the city decides to do an interconnect with Mackwater Light, in all likelihood, there will be a dedicated interconnect from their transmission line connecting over into Dayton, connect to the Dayton's distribution system. Now, the advantage that Dayton has over Lafayette is the system pressure in Mackwater and Light's transmission line out on Highway 18 is 60 to 70 PSI, let's say. It may be higher than that, I'm not sure. If we're putting that water into your reservoir, we're actually lower in pressure because the pressure, when your reservoir is full, the water pressure in the pipes, in the inlet pipes inside the water treatment plant is less than 20 PSI. So we're going from 60 or 70 PSI to 20 PSI. We will not need a pump to move water from the Mackwater and Light system into the Dayton reservoir. And then your current distribution pumps and fire pump would then pump out of that reservoir pressurize your system the same as it does today.
So can we get just a more, I would say, cut and dry description of this? When we talk about the Dayton, water treatment plant, we're talking about the reservoir. Outside,
Well, the one.
Down here.
oh, down here, okay, yeah,
Down on the west end of town.
yeah, down by, flower, there, yeah, okay.
Next to Ben's.
So if the plan would be that we magically tap into Mac Water and Life's transmission line. We then pump that water into our water treatment plant, the big green dome.
We would flow it into, we wouldn't need to pump it.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
the water would physically flow from there to there, right? There you go. Okay. No, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, all right, I'm following now. I thought you were talking about somehow the springs were involved and I got very
Well,
confused.
So,
The springs would still be producing,
Yeah.
whatever water they can produce would continue to flow into the system. Whatever water the well field can produce, it'll continue to go through the treatment plant and go into the reservoir as well.
so what's the
Those two-
anticipated, I'm sorry then.
Those two can't keep up,
Yeah,
or they can barely keep up. They can't get ahead.
That's,
So we'll be on water restrictions indefinitely for a little bit.
More than likely.
That's what I anticipate.
Well, I think we should anticipate that it's not gonna be a short-term thing.
Right.
Now, if magically we all of a sudden find a big water leak somewhere and we're able to plug it and our demand goes down. Then it may be shorter term, but I wouldn't take that to the bank.
So what are we deciding tonight? Are we not deciding anything, just discussing? What's our next step?
Madam Mayor, this is just informational so that the council knows what's going on. I do intend to have some conversations next week along the lines of what our city engineer has started to outline. To bring back, to gauge interest, first of all, and feasibility, to bring that back to the council at a future meeting. For the time being, to answer your question, Mayor, I do intend to keep the water curtailment procedures in effect until a short-term solution is found for our water needs. Of course, the council is free to amend that or adjust that as needed.
No.
so these water curtailment methods seem like they were built for not the winter. So is there, I was looking, where phase 2, phase 3, 4 is still very outdoor focused, and kind of extracurricular summer activity focused. At what point, I mean, if there's not a lot of that happening right now and we can't under, these curtailment procedures, get to a point where we're realistically, addressing the issue. I mean, what would be after that, out of curiosity? I mean,
The next level.
well, right, but I mean, isn't level 5 still pretty much like garden and outdoor focused?
At level 5. It's classified as, that's the highest level, that's an emergency level. So we could start shutting people off if they have known leaks and they're not addressing it. We could take very drastic measures to cut down on water consumption. You're correct that a lot of what is prohibited under stage 2 is geared towards outdoor use, but also includes things like water, pressure washing, vehicle washing. And in addition, my goal is to at least get people more mindful about conserving water, if nothing else.
Yes.
We've been in the water crisis almost the whole time I've been here. Every summer it started with uneven watering and then we go from no outside watering back to uneven. We've come this close to you're gonna have to use less water. Do we have a plan on how to make that work? We've never had to use it, but if you have to say you can only use 75% of what you used to use. Do we have a way of enforcing it? Is there a plan?
Other
If
than
we absolutely have to go there,
that would be level 5, and we would be able to tell when people's water use is
I think what Kitty's referencing though is that not like the known leak thing, and Kitty, tell me to stop when I overstep your bounds. But the known leak thing, yeah, we can shut her down, but we can go 100% or 0%. There's no throttle in there, right? Like we can't go and say, hey, you're cut up 50% pressure today.
Well, no,
Oh, to
I'm
individual
referring,
households you're talking.
I'm referring more to you only get 100 gallons per month. And if you go over that, I mean, that's kind of silly, but do we have a water rationing, I think might be the term. We've never had to do that. Is there a chance we might have to go to that? And will we have a plan in place to make it work? Do we need to start working on one just in case?
That's a lot to consider because we'd have to get very granular in monitoring data, usage data, and
Like I said, let's hope we don't have to go there, but it might be something we need to consider.
I would like to see us educate first a little bit more about different ways people can, don't flush your toilet 5 times if you don't need it.
Madam Mayor, if I may, just to
Yes.
finish my train of thought. Right now, I want to focus my efforts and the team's efforts towards a short-term solution. If we have to start talking about more. I don't even want to think about that right now. I want to think about solving this in the short term.
Jenny, correct me if I'm wrong, but any water projects. Maybe not this one, this immediate one, but any water projects, we're not gonna be able to do until we get the water master plan done, correct? Most of them.
Well, not necessarily, no, I mean. If you had an idea of specific water projects, we could talk about it, but
Everything.
the water master plan actually addresses in concept, most of the things we're talking about.
Yes.
I mean, it did talk about and recommended, one of the recommendations in the water master plan. Very strong recommendations was that the city can strongly consider joining a regional water. Association?
Yeah.
I'm blanking out on what the right word is.
No, you're
Good
right.
enough.
A regional water system, that's what I was trying to think of. If and when one of those was formed, at the time the water master plan was written. There was not even really an inkling that such an option was even in the works. I mean, we, as part of and this is kind of this history, I mean, for example, in the water master plan. We did essentially a survey up and down the Willamette River to try to find, and the Yamhill River, to try to find a location. Where it would seem to like it would be feasible to have an intake structure for a regional water plant or a water plant that would take water from the Willamette River. We identified a spot, I forget the name of the road, but there's a rock.
Green Acres.
Yeah, here a couple miles north of town,
Yeah.
and at that
Don't
location,
comments.
is one of the only locations within 10 miles up and down the Willamette where there is a relatively stable sandstone or mudstone bluff adjacent to the river. And as part of looking at that, the idea was potentially you could drill a shaft set back far enough from the river that you're not in risk of, landslides or something. In that area, it does every winter, there is a number of feet that slides into the river, but you set back, far enough, you drill a shaft down to the river level, and then you go out horizontally to the river, and you would be protected from a lot of those geologic hazards. By happenstance, we found out that there was a property out in that area that was in tax foreclosure. And in the water master plan, we recommended that the city look at acquiring that property from the county to hold as a future, as a potential future intake site. Well, at this, about the same time, Water and Light was starting to look at the Willamette River. Water and Light actually ended up acquiring that same piece of property from the county for the same purpose. And that's kind of when this whole regional water system idea really started to seem to get some traction. So the city has kind of had a long history of looking toward that. It's just obviously that would be a big enough project that the city of Dayton would realistically never be able to afford it on their own. I lost track of where I started with that whole discussion.
Yes, go for it.
So quick question with regard to the tie-in with Water and Light. So could we theoretically have a cutoff switch valve, what have you, at the point where that pipe goes into our reservoir, so that, okay, we turn it on when our wells are low, we turn it off when they're back up filled again, and we can kind of keep that dynamic and that kind of juggle active.
Definitely, there would be valving on that, and the intent. My vision of the intent would be, you would turn it on when you need to fill the reservoir up. And then you would shut it off. Now, what conditions would have to be in effect? And when you can turn that valve on and off is one of the unknowns that we have to try to figure out. But yes, I mean, the intent at this point is not to have a permanent, you know, Water and Light is providing water full-time for Dayton. The idea that we're exploring right now is open it up, fill up the tub, shut it off, and when the tub down to the level where you need more water, you turn the valve back on. When the conditions, whatever conditions are imposed, when you're able to meet those conditions.
Or emergency fallback. If you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Well, it would give us the ability to run the two systems that we have in place the way they're designed, instead of running this one in manual, trying to keep up, because this one's so weak producing right now.
And I will tell you, that's what other mayors would like to have, if that's the direction development.
Madam Mayor, quick question. If that was the direction we did go, do we have an idea of what kind of a timeline that would take to make happen? Would it take a year, 5 years? I mean, just curious.
5 to 10 years.
Okay.
So, permanent connection?
If we were gonna do a regional facility, regional water.
Well, once again, it depends on what you define as the regional. I mean, if you were gonna do a intertie with Water and Light, the time frame would be controlled by when you could get the agreement negotiated with them and when you could get a pipeline built to make the connection. But then you would be it wouldn't really be the regional system, because you would be buying water from Water and Light from their existing system. The regional system that would be in the future is anticipated to draw water from the Willamette River. That's probably, if I had to throw a dart at the wall, I would say that's 20 to 30 years out.
You think
Is
it's long?
what the projections are, because, you know, but it also is, the big assumption on that is, you know, when's the money gonna become available? If all of a sudden there was, you know, money to build things like this, it might happen sooner.
Counselor Market.
We're gonna be spending some extra money getting in water from McMinnville. That's gonna be fun to budget. How do you prepare a budget?
Well, you don't, you just gonna have to amend it later.
Yeah. It's an accounting nightmare here we're talking about, but do we have any ideas yet on how much we might have to increase our water monthly charges?
But that's a fair question, and this idea is a little over 24 hours old.
Yeah.
We have a lot.
This is gonna
lot
be
to
part of
figure
the
out.
deal though, right?
So, also Chris had a question too. For this. So, all right, we talked about a lot of the last hour, so kind of dial in on some of this. So short term, the primary solution is tie in Mac water line, put in the option, the turn off so that we can.
Before you go down that road, this is a physical option. Right, this is,
Well, it is a physical option that appears from what the
Yeah.
information we have right now, that it's doable.
correct.
Now,
That doesn't mean that we're gonna get along, they're gonna get along with us,
That
that
doesn't-
there's gonna be all this work, like, we got all the people on our side, but like,
Yeah.
physically could pipe, connect to pipe potential, right? I just wanna,
yeah,
I just wanna
Yeah,
make,
no,
that's preface
yeah.
before you go down this plan.
Yeah, no, 100%. So, okay, so then if everything works out in the way that we would like it to work out. So we would have the tie-in to Mac Water and Light, via the Lafayette pump station to the reservoir in Dayton. And then with that turn off so that it's only active in the times in which we need it, which then can be defined at a later date. And then the long-term solutions, once we have the emergency solution in place, the ideas are limited to at this point in time. The very, very long-term, 20 to 30-year regional water authority, idea. The Fisher Farms to tie into the well field to then supplement our well field with that other property using the methane, filtration system. So we don't have to build a whole infrastructure around Fisher Farms. And then to still use the springs off of McDougal, right? And then to make it so that the combination of the expanded well field plus the springs hopefully gets us through, and then the tie-in with Mac Water and Light is the emergency when we need it. And then that's kind of what I understand this to be. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that seems to be a fair summary
Okay.
of very good distillation.
Yeah.
So, just so you know, like the Springs watershed. We can control when that is turned on and off, just like the well field. If we were able to tie in with Mac Water and Light, it would be the same thing. Lafayette controls when they turn on Mac Water and Light. If they don't turn it on, they don't use it. So it would be something we would control. It would just, like Denny said, all of the fine details would be, we would have to figure that out, what that looks like, what, amounts and that sort of stuff. But yes, we would, essentially, we would be able to on and off as we deem it.
More options than not enough is always.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So the next step is for you guys to open up the discussion.
Yes.
Yes. Chris, I have a question.
Anybody else wanted to clarify on this?
Madam Mayor, I'll also say too, as the next step, I have asked our city engineer to prepare a scope of work to start design on the temporary physical additions to the water treatment plant. So that would be involved to authorizing them to start with design work.
Just,
My understanding and from what Jeremy has kind of talked to us about is that design work would kind of start in parallel with all of these other discussions.
Correct.
But all of these other discussions and getting all the parties on board would obviously happen before any physical construction started. But one of the challenges in this is also the undefined thing at this point is everybody's aware, supply chain issues make it so that things that you might have been able to go and buy off the shelf from somebody 5 years ago. We don't live in that world anymore, and there's a lot of long lead time items on a lot of products, for instance, flow meters. When the Public Works had to replace the flow meter, Dayton's master flow meter at the water treatment plant, several, a number of years ago.
4 months?
I'm not gonna try to say how many, because I'll guess wrong, or remember wrong, but a number of years ago, not that long ago, but, the lead time on that flow meter was like 4 months. Now, that was a much larger meter, so our hope is that with the smaller meter that we're looking at, the lead times would be shorter. But it's not something, most likely, it's not something where you're just gonna go buy off the shelf somewhere.
That's a really dumb question. So is it?
Water is wet, yes.
You know, I'm really wondering if water was heavier than methane. So is it in the realm of possibility for us to make this really, really, short term, like, okay, we need water tomorrow? Like, could we contract with Mac Water and Light to be like, hey, we'll pull up, we'll contract with the tanker trucks, we'll bring up tanker trucks to whatever water supply system you have. We'll take the tanker truck down to our reservoir and do that 30, 40 times. And then fill up the reservoir for a one-time thing, just in like this is literally an emergency situation. Is that an option?
I asked Denny, that's the first question I asked Denny, and I'll let you address that.
Okay, well,
I'm about to start a trucking company.
the first challenge would be find somebody that has a big enough tanker truck that you can move water in.
Oh, okay.
Close to economically. The second challenge is, how do you get it out of the truck and into the reservoir? I mean, that you could, yes, you could do that. Now, whether that's an economically viable option.
Not likely.
I don't quite honestly, I don't have any numbers to back this up, but I am skeptical of whether the city could afford to do that on an ongoing basis. I'm virtually certain you wouldn't be able to, because it's one of the more expensive ways to get water, is to buy it from somewhere. And the transportation costs on anything you buy are a significant portion of the cost that you pay for pretty much anything that we have in our modern economy.
This is irrelevant, that is currently being done by members of the larger community. There are dairy farms that are buying Mac water, physically trucking it right from the hospital to their Lafayette dairy. They do that every day, multiple trucks a day. So it's not like impossible. It is going to be cost prohibitive. It's gonna be costly. But if we have no water or no fire, like, I can guarantee you, we can get trucks, we can get water, and we can get her moving.
Yeah.
That's like,
It's just how much will it cost?
I would hate to be the guy that says, we don't have water to put your house fire out.
Yeah.
Sorry, because it was too expensive.
Oops.
That's
Well,
a.
why don't they just get their own damn trucks like the ones in Los Angeles?
So for the wells that we have in the well field, do they have holding tanks, or do they go directly to the reservoir? Is there any kind of in between? Because I'm thinking of gravity, we'd have to pump into the reservoir, but could we do it? Emergency situation, thinking about it, can you go gravity into the well in some way, shape or form instead of thinking about the reservoir?
You dump it, treated water into the aquifer,
yeah,
which
never
is a
mind.
no-no.
Yeah, there is a way to do that, but there's specifics that you have to go through.
Yeah, that's called
ODOT.
aquifer storage and recovery. And one of the things you have to demonstrate is that the water you're putting into the ground is compatible with the water that's already in the ground and won't cause chemical reactions and stuff. If you're putting treated finished water that has chlorine in it into the ground, the first thing that would happen is it would precipitate iron and manganese out because of the chlorine in there, and you would never get approval from the Water Resource Department. But even if you could get approval, that is a very long process and very expensive to go through with the studies to even get a permit to do that.
Lafayette looked at that briefly.
Well, they actually have a aquifer storage and recovery system up in their watershed.
Did they
Actually,
end up getting, you did it for them? Oh my gosh, I knew they were looking at it, but I never
Right.
did follow through.
Is not,
It's very expensive.
it's not the panacea. It helped take, they had,
Edge.
one of their springs produced far more water in the wintertime than they could use. And then so that most of the bulk of the flows from one of their springs was overflowing all winter long. So the aquifer storage and recovery was that we injected into the ground through the well. And it was coming out of the same type of aquifer, just further up the mountain. Put it into there, and then from a water rights perspective, then they could pump that water back out during the summertime. However, once again, it's a water rights issue. It says you have the right to pull this amount of water out. It doesn't mean that that amount of water is available. Because if you're on the side of a mountain, you're putting water into a well, you can only fill it up so far before it pops out of the side of the hill somewhere down here and turns into a new spring. And you can't fill the bathtub up any higher than that drain, that overflow drain. And so the best that does is it fills up to that overflow drain elevation rather than it being way down here. So it's better than just dumping it into the stream all winter long. But it's not a complete answer. I mean, this recovery from an ASR system is never 100%.
So another silly question is so our springs that we currently have in set right now, talk to me about the storage facility as to how that looks, because I don't know, is there such a thing?
Well, you have two storage reservoirs up in the watershed.
Okay,
It's what's the concrete one? What size is that? The big tank up there, I think is 600,000 gallons.
Yeah.
Okay,
The steel one, and then there's a smaller, older concrete reservoir
That leaks.
well, it does have some leaks in it and have some problems because of its age, but it's much smaller.
but it's not a man-made reservoir.
No.
Okay,
no,
okay,
it
so
is
there's no,
well, it is a man-made reservoir. Yes, it's a
Oh.
You have a steel reservoir and it's a concrete reservoir.
But the water is.
It goes in on it.
yeah, I guess the question I was,
It's not a-
I feel like this is
Yeah.
payback for the water wet thing.
yeah, it really is, yeah. So the reason I was asking is because number one, if it was like, I'm thinking like a literal reservoir, right? Think Detroit Dam, McGuire,
Oh, okay.
anything,
That type
Green
of
Peter,
reservoir, yeah.
that type of reservoir, right?
There's
So
a
I
tank.
was curious if there was if there was percolation through the soil, right? If it wasn't clay lined or it wasn't lined in some way, there's that. Second piece was, I said, could we physically expand it? Because, I mean, a D8 excavator or D8 dozer can do a lot of work. And if we had the water rights to physically expand that storage capacity. Now, it is not a hole in the ground. It is a tub sitting on top of the ground. So that conversation's over.
And this is why we need to have a tour of all of the facilities. That way we have a better understanding
Yes.
of these different things and we kind of can get a better, make better decisions.
So in general, your springs set up at the head end of the draw up there. They're higher in elevation than I'm gonna change my terminology, than the tanks. The storage tanks. They're higher in elevation, so the water flows by gravity down and goes through a small building and where chlorine gets injected and it flows into those reservoirs by gravity.
Thanks.
And tanks. Thank you. Flows into the storage tanks by gravity. And then out of those storage tanks, it flows by gravity down to town and goes through it. And the elevation is high enough. The pressure is too high to pipe directly into town, so it goes through a pressure reducing valve and it takes about roughly 30 PSI off of the pressure that is on the pipeline at the inlet to the PRV. And then that water flows into town and pressurizes the distribution system from that end. The water treatment plant pumps pressurize the distribution system from that end. And they work in tandem.
So these tanks are running dry right now because we're.
No, not those, this.
It's the reservoir in town that we're having trouble filling up, and that's where your fire flows come from. We have a relatively large tank up there, 600,000 gallons. The problem is that the pipeline between the tank and town is an 8-inch pipeline that was put in the 1930s. It's way past due to be replaced, and once again, I'm sure that somewhere on that pipeline, there's leaks. We just, as they become apparent or as they're discovered, they get plugged. but that pipeline is way past due to be replaced. But the problem is the pipeline is small enough that the flow rate that we can get through that is limited to, say, 250, maybe 300 gallons a minute. Residential fire flows are 1,000 gallons a minute. So we can't provide fire flows from that tank up, the storage tank up on the hill. We can provide a portion of those flows. And during low use periods, when we have to shut down the water treatment plant pumps, we can keep the pressure on the system as long as the usage is not too high.
So now, probably because I'm sitting here thinking too much, is we have 3 sources of water currently for the city. McDougal Wells, the spring, the wells on Airport Road.
Yes, I mean, we typically lump the McDougal wells and the springs into the same.
In the same category.
Into the same bucket,
Okay,
because they're both in the watershed. The McDougal wells are at the lower end of the watershed, right as you get down into the valley
Sure.
floor, but they're still into that basalt.
So-
Aquifer.
did I mishear you in saying that our storage tanks have adequate supply, or are we low on supply in our storage tanks?
We are low on supply up there.
So McDougal well and storage tanks are low, as well as then the well field on our Airport Road.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so all 3 sources, thumbs down.
Well, the challenge is it's not just being able to fill the tank. I mean, if we shut off the PRD, we could probably fill the reservoirs up on the hill, but when you're supplying town and trying to fill those reservoirs, and you're pulling more water, as much water from up there as you can, because we don't have enough
Yeah,
water on the
yeah,
other
yeah,
end of
yeah.
town. We can't fill those reservoirs back up because we're pulling too much out.
Yeah.
How long would it take to fill those reservoirs?
Tanks.
Thank you, thanks.
Tanks, storage tanks.
I like that better.
Oh.
Thanks. How long would it, I mean, if you could, in a happy world, turn off something and then wait for those to fill back up? 2 days?
2 days.
Well, we can't tell people they can't use their water for 2 days, so that ain't gonna work.
Everybody's going on vacation.
Just to make sure, an expansion of that long-term solutions is kind of what I'm thinking of at this moment in time. Expansion of the McDougal, system, whether that's in the form of tanks and the pipeline, so they can accommodate an increased flow, that's not on the table long-term.
Okay, can you repeat that?
So it seems like with the springs and then that kind of duo system, between the springs and the well over on McDougal. So it seems like the issues are twofold with that. So it's the pipeline from the 1930s that limits the flow, but it's also the storage capacity of the tanks up there as well. So is an expansion of both of those things on the table long term?
Yes.
Well, the expansion of the storage tanks up in the watershed is not I
Well,
don't believe it's in the water master plan, except for
the old cement one.
when the old cement one dies, then the city may consider. Once that's taken out of service, then they'll need to evaluate, do they want to build a new tank to replace that? And if they do that, what size of tank do you want to build?
Cause you can build a bigger one.
But, right now, we have the springs, which I think we're limited to about 70 gallons a minute,
70.
which is the water rights we have, the right to use that amount of water, even if there's more water than that coming out of the spring, we're supposed to only use what we have rights to. And then the 2 McDougal wells also have a limited supply. So building a bunch of bigger tanks up there that we don't have enough water to fill at the same time we're pulling water to town may not be the best use of the city's resources.
Gotcha.
So,
Just learning, yeah.
yeah, I mean, one of the things that when, I'm gonna say when, because we will do it at some point, when we replace the transmission line from the watershed down to town with a new pipeline, that will be, instead of being an 8-inch pipeline, it will be a 12-inch pipeline. We've already started that process. The new water line that goes across the utility bridge There's a 12-inch pipeline that's been stubbed all the way over to, or run all the way over to the PRV station. And then we'll replace it from the PRV station up to McDougal Wells. From McDougal Wells to the watershed tank, the lower half of that was replaced in, I want to say 2015. The city replaced that portion of it. And then the upper portion of it, they decided to defer. They didn't have the money. It was more important to replace the bottom section because that's a higher pressure portion. That also went down through a ravine and underneath a drainage way down there. Where since that was put in the 30s, the drainage channel had gotten deeper and the pipe was no longer buried through there. So when we put it through there, it's actually now entrenched through the rock at that crossing, so it's in the stream is basically eroded down to the top of the bedrock. And our pipeline is 3 feet down below the bedrock, so it's about as safe as we can make it into the foreseeable future. So that's probably, and I'm just thinking of lakes on the map, that's probably about 15 to maybe 20% at most of the watershed transmission line that's already been replaced. Once that 12-inch pipeline is in place, we would be able to get about 1,000 gallons a minute from the watershed tanks down to town. And, be able to meet fire flow demands. And when we're talking fire flow, there's two things that we have to always remember. There's the flow rate that they need to fight the fire for the 2 or 3 or 4 hours that they're fighting the fire. And then there's the storage volume that you have to be able to continuously provide that flow rate for the defined period of time that they need to fight the fire.
So that pipeline, instead of being able to do the 1,000 gallons a minute, it doesn't solve the fill problem though.
No,
Correct.
no, it's a delivery problem.
Gotcha.
But the source problem is not.
It's still gonna be a source problem, no matter what.
Except for the fact that any leaks that we have in that 90-year-old pipeline now we wouldn't be losing water into the ground. That undoubtedly there are undoubtedly leaks somewhere along that pipeline. It's just, they're not big enough to be spraying to the surface yet, or to make the surface wet in the winter time or in the summertime that we could find.
I think you asked some questions.
Any more questions? Okay, good. Cause I'm stalling this now. And we're moving on. And if you have any more questions, write them down, send them in. We're gonna go ahead and move on since we're done, unless Denny or anybody else.
Do you need anything from us to go and do something?
No, sir, I'm gonna work with the team next week, get some conversations and more analysis going to present to you in a future meeting.
All right. Well, then we're gonna move on to council comments and concerns, and we're gonna start with Counselor Tyrone.
No, I know you and I talked about something earlier today. I don't know if now's the time to do it or wait till next week.
We can do it next week.
That's what I'm thinking. So at this time, I don't have any comments further.
No further comments.
Okay. Just point of clarification, so next we should expect to hear from you as TDB.
Correct.
Okay, that's all.
I'm moving as fast as I can.
Totally cool. I just wanted to ask out of curiosity. That's all I got.
Yeah, so I'm concerned about our water and. No, I'm joking. I'm nothing.
Counselor Matthews.
I was under the impression we should have had a $5 increase on sewer, just the cost of living that Rochelle had talked about it. And it was, I haven't seen it yet, but we do have that $13 increase coming up here pretty soon. Wasn't there supposed to be a $5 increase already?
Go ahead.
So it was supposed to be a $5 stormwater fee. We don't have any. It would be a new fee. It would be a fee to work on the stormwater.
Oh,
So
okay.
the idea would have been to collect this money over time to be able to work in the stormwater infrastructure, which is something else that is lacking.
Okay, thank you.
But that's another discussion.
Yeah, that's another discussion. for later time.
So this isn't the cost of, cost. Yeah, okay, cool. I think that's, I know they're starting to take reservations maybe for the LOC conference on May 1st and 2nd. Somebody. So yeah, I wanna make sure, I missed all of the LOC conferences last year. Something came up, literally. But yeah, I wanna make sure we, that we can get registered for that. So, but that's it for now.
I just wanted to go to myself. I need to call PG because the light is out on the corner of Lori Lane and my Church Street. I don't know why it was at night, but anyways, that's all I got. So, any other questions, comments, concerns? Motion to adjourn? Woo, we are adjourned, 7:29.
Yeah.